are not applicable at longer distances. So if we use the,
So in other words, if we did the tone study that's required under the IEC study, we wouldn't be having any impact on something at 2,000 feet or 3,000 feet. We'd only have some,
right,
because the study only works for the first 500 feet.
it's, well, they hedge their bets after that. They basically say, well, you know, it doesn't, as they said, it's not applicable at longer distances. It does not, just because you've measured that tone there, doesn't mean you're gonna get it at 2,000 feet or 3,000 feet. In fact, it's considered very unlikely. The thing about the EPA or the DEP one is, that one can be measured and used even at sensitive receptor sites. If somebody says that they think that there's a tone, it can be measured there. And it's a simple, easy to understand. Now, the one thing that I am questioning, and that's another question that Mr. Haskell is going to get back to, is that the DEP study on tones, and again, this is the old EPA, I think allows too much of a difference in the low frequencies between the different bands. They're looking for a 15 dBA difference between bands at the low frequencies. And I questioned Haskell, I think that's too much. I did find another place that they used the same method, but they used a lower dB setting.
So dB is.
The difference between those side bands.
So potentially we're looking at using the DEP study as a guide, but using more restrictive dB differential standards for the different tones.
Right. And again, this is an easy one to measure and to understand. I will dare anyone who hasn't taken engineering to look through just the flow chart for determining tones under the IEC 61400 and understand it. It's a procedure that you go through about 6 times just to determine the result. It's anyone that's interested in seeing it, I have copies of the entire procedure. I took notes.
We'll go with the EPA first.
Keep it simple.
Now, I will say that we also should, if that's determined, apply the 5 dBA penalty to the entire sound level. Rather than just to the 1 octave band. Because using that one, if it's that much louder, you're going to notice it, they need to be penalized. Because the thing is, looking at actual sound levels off of half a dozen different turbines, there's lots of sources for sound levels off different brands of turbines. There are some that would get penalized. Most of them just don't produce tones. Tones used to be a big problem 20 and 30 years ago, especially with the older turbines were called downwind turbines. You had the tower, the turbine was on the downwind side. The sound insulation and the nacelles
What are they
was
called?
good. Downwind. The sound insulation in the nacelles was nowhere near as good. And on top of that, the wind blew by the tower first, and there is a dead zone right behind that tower. That causes a huge increase in the noise and tends to cause a tone, because every time the blade goes by there, it's going through this dead zone. All your modern turbines are upwind, which means the wind passes through the turbine first and then goes past the tower. And that's one of the reasons they went to them, even though in some ways they're more complicated, is it cuts down on a lot of the problems. You've heard a lot of this, Dave, and is this pretty much the way you got the gist of it from the, or are you looking for more material?
Actually, I'd like to see it a little bit more. I want to look at
I'll forward you a whole
Yeah.
bunch of
Okay,
links.
the other thing is when there were the rationale for changes, okay, you said it's from several sources. I mean, again, I'd like to have some of those sources more footnoted.
Okay,
Okay, because it just is gonna make it easier to have an explanation for this in April.
oh yes, oh yes. I haven't had time to put together all of the
Right, but I
rationale.
mean, if you had like, if for that particular one, you know, under, when you're doing like some really specific things like that, I think if you could just list 2 or 3 different sources, that would be useful.
One thing about the sources though, are these generally accepted, you know, like some industry standard says, yeah,
No,
this
no,
is
a
a
lot of
good
them are by
study?
researchers, and then other ones are actual noise ordinances in other countries, in other locales.
Like, you know, like
Well, for instance,
publishing in the, you know, New
Yeah.
England medical thing, you know, it's an accepted kind of, and it's open for criticism and all that.
I got some here, I'll forward them to you. You
I'd
can
like to take a look at that. I
Well,
mean,
if you just list them all out, because then like when you list them out, I mean, I'm agreeing with you, because some of the studies that
They would call it quack science.
Right,
Yeah,
right,
well,
but the other ones.
what you're gonna find on some of these is the footnotes to some of them run 10 and 20 pages of sources that they
Well,
quote.
that's fine, but some of them are gonna say right at the beginning, they're gonna say that
Right.
they're peer reviewed or they're not peer reviewed.
11
You know, like
falls.
even if it's from not from like the AMA as an example, but if it's from a university, but it says it's peer reviewed, that would be probably pretty useful.
Something that
Yeah,
knowledgeable people look at and say, yeah,
Right.
this makes sense.
I'll
Right.
send you the 11 fall one first of all, and then I'll also send you this one whole report on health effects and things. The Massachusetts study was only published in 2012, and they went really, you're gonna have a couple hundred pages to read.
It's okay. So,
I'll
all
get
right,
them.
keep going.
I'll get them all for you.
So stop right there.
Okay, I haven't
Okay.
changed the one around 4,000 feet at this point.
Is this the one that we're supposed to have at 35 or something, or?
No, right now, we've got it at 45 at night and 55 during the day, within 4,000 feet.
Well, that was the other one. That was the
Uh,
sensitive area one.
Yeah, the sensitive receptor one, or what we used to call protected locations. I haven't changed the day-night pad or anything on this. Again, when we're within 4,000 feet, you're in that area where people will be affected by it, but we've pretty much made sure that no one within that distance, unless they've signed a mitigation waiver, you know, if they're willing to live with louder sound limits, they just have to sign off on it. If not, it's the developer's problem. You have to accept the fact that within close distances, these are going to produce higher levels of sound. Yes.
Now, a lot of communities around go with like this same standard, but they go with a mile, so this is more restrictive.
Well, here's the thing, even if they go up to a mile, as we've seen, if you look at a lot of the different sound maps that we've looked at, not just for our project, look at Stetson, look at, you'll see a bunch of them when I forward you these links. Very rarely do the sound levels get higher than 35 or 40 up to 4,000 feet. It's only in certain conditions of terrain where you get sound on an hourly basis or a day-night basis higher than those levels beyond that. You can go up on a mile, but by the time you get out to a mile, you're generally down to 30.
So, go back up. So,
So there's no reason to go out to a mile.
go back up again, please.
That was what we determined back when we first wrote it. Go back up.
Okay, so, right there. So then it says if pre-construction estimates of the post-construction sound levels exceed limits below, then the application will be denied. So, I mean, what, would you want to say that, this is just, I'm not advocating again, it's just a discussion. Would you say that they had to be mitigated?
That's the only way they'd be able to build. They could either mitigate or.
Well, whereas right now it says they have to be denied. So the question on the table would be.
Later on, you have the ability to have mitigate. It says
Well, no,
further
but-
down that you can, that any of these can be changed with mitigation.
Right, that's a mitigation waiver, but I'm talking about with the, I don't know, let's say that it was determined that when the wind was blowing at 7 knots out of, 48 degrees off of, 360-degree azimuth, then this condition would be prevalent. But as soon as you went to 55 degrees or you went down to 35 degrees, it only happened between, in some particular range that it was possible for this to occur in the study. Would you?
Well, remember, in the study, they assumed worse conditions in all directions. So
Right.
you haven't got to worry about it.
Well, I'm asking you, the question, so that is the question. I'm asking you, should there be a mechanism for mitigation on a project? If in fact there's not a mitigation waiver, but in some scenario it comes up, should there be the ability to approve the project and say you can't run it if these conditions exist? Or should you just leave it as it is? That's the question.
I think we should leave it as is, but the thing is, these are the projected. If they actually do have a problem afterwards, there are various things they can do to mitigate it.
Well, no, I'm agreeing with you, that's why I'm asking you the question. So you're saying now, if it's predicted that it might do it, that's why I'm asking the question. It says right now, if it's predicted that it might do it, the project has to be denied. However, if it's not predicted that it does it, and, okay, so everything looks like it's gonna be fine. That's the other scenario. Everything looks fine, nothing's gonna happen. And then it does happen, it says right there that you have to mitigate your situation so that it doesn't do it. That's what that says. It says,
This is only based on the pre-construction sound study.
right, I'm agreeing, but then it says if these limits are exceeded after the wind energy facility has been built, then it will be in violation. But if you go through and look about violations, then there's basically you have to figure out when it does it and you do a mitigation. You wouldn't make them tear it down. That's how it's.
If they can't cure it, then tearing it down is the last.
Well, that's the last
Yes.
resort,
But yes, they would have to mitigate it.
right, so they have to basically turn it off, make sure that the turbines didn't turn under the conditions that the actual event happened.
Right, and there actually are programs for most of the turbines now to reduce the sound output. It reduces their power output as well, but that's what's been done in a lot of locations.
Is that addressed in the operational permit?
The enforcement part of it is. So
Yeah.
my question is going back to this, again, I know it's like an odd question or whatever, and maybe I'm not being very clear about it, but I just want to make sure at least, and I'm not advocating one way or the other, but I at least want to make sure it gets looked at. Right now, if it looks like if it says it's fine, and it gets built and it's not fine, it's still built, but the person has to mitigate it.
Absolutely.
Correct. We're all good with that, okay?
Yeah, we're all in agreement.
Right, now, but if it indicates that it might do it, it still might never do it because of the way the standard is written. It might never happen because that worst case event is like almost a virtual impossibility.
Except for the fact that there's a lot of variability on the actual sound output. So I won't say it's an impossibility, but it's it's remote, especially when you.
Right, so now what the ordinance says is, so if the numbers come up not very favorable, that we're not going to allow the developer to offer any mitigation in advance to prevent the bad numbers from happening. That's what we're saying in this.
Yeah, that's what we're saying. In
Okay,
advance.
so do we want to keep doing it this way or not?
I think we should. Otherwise than that, you get into a situation where, let's say, you allow them to use one of the mitigation methods ahead of time,
Mm-hmm.
so it's built. And now it turns out that even with the mitigation,
It still doesn't work.
it still doesn't work. They're up the creek. This way here, there is a way to drop it by another 3 to 6 decibels, depending on how severe, there's ways that they can mitigate it other than completely shutting it down.
Right. All right, well, I just wanted to have it discussed. It's still,
So,
do you understand that?
Yeah,
Dave, do you,
but still, I think I did.
Vern, did you kind of get the gist of that discussion? So we're gonna leave it the way it is. We're not gonna allow the person to
mitigation ahead of
mitigate
time.
in advance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, it either demonstrates that it works or,
Not approved.
okay, all right. Just,
Yeah, that's the way
all
I
right.
felt.
I just want to make sure that we all agree and that we have a discussion.
Okay. Okay, you getting the feel for how complicated this is? Okay, the low frequency sound limits within 4,000 feet, and this is the one I am waiting for some of Tesla's return on. But basically, the entire standard is suspect. Given research now available, I believe a standard based on a separate fixed upper sound limit for low frequencies only is much more appropriate for addressing any concerns about low frequency sounds affecting health and annoyance concerns of citizens.
But we're only measuring, we ran into problems before the formula.
Well, it isn't, the thing I found out in studying it is that it isn't, that the formula was based on, again, on an
Worst case
idea
scenario.
from different types of projects, nothing to do with wind turbines. What's been determined is if you were looking at conventional power plants, airports, roads, and other things, they discovered in Europe that, and a lot of these studies were done in Europe, was that if you had a difference of dBA to dBc on these types of sounds of more than 20 decibels, that they tended to get more annoyance type complaints about the sound. But what we're finding out is that for wind turbines, the sound is different and this particular approach doesn't work as well. And the important thing is whether or not there are health concerns. And this has nothing to do with health. And not only that, if you're really concerned about low frequencies, DBC doesn't even measure the
So we
real
should be
low
looking at the
frequencies.
DBG standard if we're going to consider low frequencies.
Either DBG or a straight DB standard with no weighting at all. In fact, I've got, which one of my things here? Ah, shoot. Which one of these has? Is it this one? This is one of the ones you'll be getting a link to. This guy here is a researcher that's, I think it's this one that's got it, or is it? I'm looking for, this particular study, by the way, is considered one of the, okay, here's a look at the curves, the dBA and dBc for comparison. I'm hoping this one has a dBg in it as well. See, A is pretty much mimics the human hearing. C adds in low frequencies, but notice how fast below 100 even it goes down. And it measures none of the super low frequencies that a lot of people are concerned about. Now, does this one have the dBg curve to show you just how different it is? Here's dBg. I question the validity of this one because of the way it rounds off different frequencies. And only does it round some of them off, it actually adds to the ones right around 20 hertz. It doesn't round those off, it emphasizes them. If you take a look at your zero level, from about 10 to, actually from about 10 to, I guess, yeah, from 10 to 30, it adds to the sound in its weighting.
Flip back up to the other one for a second.
Yeah. Notice the range on this one at the bottom for the
Yeah, it's got,
frequencies.
yeah, it's a lot different.
Yeah, it's
But
a
the other
lot
one,
different.
yeah, people, yeah.
Whoops. There's your dBA, dBc.
Right, so it's another whole 10 decibels higher, but it's down in that low range. It's like right above where the letter C is. Right?
I wish you should see them both at the same time.
Right, but see where the letter C is, will be like,
Yeah.
or it's actually even to the left of that.
Right,
Because
yes, it is.
because that's actually 10 points in there, and it's the same 20, so it's,
Well,
really
that's
only
10,
like-
10 hertz at the bottom is
Right.
that first line.
right, so the line actually on this one would only be like a 1/9 of the distance over to the right from the number 10.
Right.
So that it would actually end up, if you went up and intersected that C graph, it would be just,
I've
Maybe-
got another chart somewhere that shows how they all.
it'd be like at -10, and then,
Yeah,
and on the A one, it's gonna be at -60, so it's almost a mute point, -70 even.
yes. Well, actually, A, by the time you get down to around 1 hertz, it subtracts like 130 or 140 decibels from the actual sound level.
Right,
C doesn't go as bad, but it still doesn't tell you a lot about those really low ones.
right.
G has this really funny weighting, which is why I'm really wondering, when some people are recommending this, wait a minute, what is the justification for rounding off these low ones and increasing the ones between 10 and 30? I haven't found, G is so little used, it appears that finding a lot of information about the justification behind it is becoming a little difficult.
So if you use the, a separate fixed upper sound limit, would the 20 dB change and go to a higher level?
No, it would be right, if, it would be a straight level line for the weighting. This is
Wait,
how it, this
You wouldn't
is,
adjust it for the hertz.
there'd be no adjustment for hertz at all.
So it
So it'd be really-
still have to be less than 20 dB then?
No, I'm not sure what you're asking.
The sound limit.
Well, no, the sound limit now, if you were using just straight dB, you're gonna set it at a higher
Well, that's
level.
what I was asking.
You'd have to, because it's not rounding anything off.
That's right, okay.
You've got to, if you compare the different,
So this would make it, if you just like inserted this, you would make it so that it could be noisier. Right? Is that what you're saying?
well, again, the level of
If
this,
you just use
this
straight
Alex
dB.
Salt record, oh, straight dB, you would have to set a level, but you would probably set it higher because you're not rounding anything off.
Not
You're using the
subtracting
absolute
from
power.
one from another.
Right.
You're
So-
not subtracting anything from it.
That's right.
Whereas dBA, as you get down to these lower frequencies, subtracts a lot
Do you
quicker.
have any number that you?
I'm waiting for Hessler to get back on my comments to him. And again, he said, from his project, he said probably beginning of next week. He was finishing a major project and being out in the field, and he just wasn't gonna get to it. And I have to understand, our responding to my comments is compared to his regular work. Right. But now, is there one here for what? I was hoping to find the curves here just to show you what a turbine looks like, the actual sound power levels, the actual straight dB versus dBA, and it's here somewhere. Is it in this one? I think it's gonna be in this one. Well, there's a whole section on annoyance. This is considered one of the definitive studies, by the way.
Do we have this one already?
I'm not sure, I'm gonna send you a link to it. If you don't,
I didn't get that one.
I didn't send this link to you. This one is long and,
We'll send all the links out that you know,
okay, you're gonna get a long.
that's fine. And then what I'll do is I'll post them all.
Yeah.
All right, let's go back to the ordinance, because it's,
Okay. Okay, so you see what I've been doing?
Yeah.
so you've been sleeping well.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And I will tell you, there's a whole bunch of different studies out by some very good people that say the whole thing is mostly just blown out of proportion. But the fact is that some people are bothered. But one of the things you also notice is 90% of the people that are bothered are within
3,000.
less than that usually.
Yeah.
The majority of them are 1,500 feet.
Yeah.
A lot of them are 800, 900.
Early problems.
Oh, but there is one other thing. The people that seem to be most, well, there's a whole thing about annoyance and who seems to be most affected. Okay, at 4,000 feet and beyond. This is the one here that I hadn't changed yet. Well, actually, I left it here because this doesn't apply next to residences. Outside of residences, I was going to let it stay the 10 dBA. It's in a patch of woods, or a maximum of 40 dBA, night and day.
We're gonna go 35 though, right?
Well, 35 is next
Next to
to
residence.
sensitive locations. That would include residences, schools, daycares, churches, golf courses.
So you're gonna keep, okay, all right, I see what you're saying. So basically, it's always gonna be 40.
Except for those places we determine are sensitive locations.
All right, so you're gonna make it more conservative here and go down, so it's always gonna be 40 and 35, and no longer 50, 40, and 35.
Yeah, no
50.
longer allowing a 50 during the day. The thing is, and the reason for allowing this to be a little bit higher than the 35 is that normally during the day, background sounds go up anyway, usually significantly. There's road noise, there's all kinds of things happening that, like I say, if I go outside of my house during the day, I can't get a reading under 40. Most of the time it's at 45, sitting in the yard, and that's with no cars going by. Just sound that you don't think of as being sound is being picked up, even when you think it's quiet. Okay,
Okay, and we're gonna use the same tonal thing that we're gonna come up with later.
yes.
Okay. One of the things looking at this, are we gonna be able, at some point, because I think it's very confusing to go through and figure out what the requirements are for sound, are we gonna be able to go through and consolidate all the sound under like one cap? Okay, like you have here, there's like 3 or 4 different areas where we talk about sound. We talk about sound in the sensitive areas, and then we talk about,
No, we can't, we need to keep all 3.
Separate.
There's no way to get around keeping 3 separate sections of standards.
okay,
You need one for your sensitive receptors that protects people basically in their houses, shorelines. Remember, we added to the sensitive receptors before, the shorelines, which means if you've got, even if there's not a house built on it, anything that's in shoreline zoning is considered a protected location or a sensitive
okay, so
receptor.
what's the next one? Sensitive receptor. Then what's the next area again, was the
Was-
within?
Under 4,000 feet and over 4,000
Oh,
feet.
right, so, yeah, I guess you're right.
I mean, you could reduce it to just, I don't see any way of reducing it to just 1 for something of this nature.
No.
Well, maybe we can do a table, just like you suggested before. You have sound standards, and then they have the 3 different levels, and then,
That is actually possible.
Come on, Mr. Table.
And now you mentioned mitigation waivers.
This is just a very, very minor thing, but it just says any right of way. Is that in public and private roads or
Any roadway,
Under mitigation, whatever, then you get it. You've got
Oh,
the
shadow flicker
and
and,
blade length, which, the blade length standard, I guess we're doing away with. But under B, it says.
yeah, I debated whether to just completely do away with it or leave it there, but I can't really see a reason for even leaving it there.
the blade length?
Yeah,
Take it out. No, I thought we took it out.
because it really isn't going to be, if you've got that coating, which is what they put on all of them now, it's really not even a,
Yeah, I thought it was, we'd already agreed. that-
Right. So
well, we had taken it out of having to do the study for it.
Um,
I hadn't taken it out of the actual standard.
uh,
The only way that would become a problem is if the coating wears off on the blades.
I would just scratch it right.
But
out.
even then, as one person, if you take a look at the way those blades are made, because of the convex surface, you don't tend to get a reflection you can see off of them, even at close range, even if they weren't.
So just take blade length out.
And
Yeah,
take D out
okay.
entirely. D is our just blade.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll take D out. There really isn't any. I didn't change any of the setbacks, because actually most of the setbacks that we've got are pretty much in accord with all the standards I can find.
So we use the word residence there, okay. And we have a definition of residence back in what, 18? Or 6?
Residence is in 18.
18.
Okay.
Okay, well, my next question is, because actually this is where we get wrapped up into that 4,000 feet versus a mile thing. Because this 4,000, go ahead.
The one question I had, and I did not take this out, but if we're limiting sensitive receptors to 35 dB, period, do we need to set a distance?
And that's what I was gonna ask, because this is where we have gotten into this little discussion with some people about this 4,000 feet thing, because we made it so that the sound standard is more restrictive, you know, but when we made the sound standard more restrictive, you know, we had this issue in here about the protected locations. So, you know, rather than just being just this somewhat arbitrary distance of 4,000 feet, it could be a mile, it could be 500 feet, but if it's 35 decibels, then it's 35 decibels.
35 dBA max. I actually thought about recommending just taking it out. I'm sure we would get a lot of flack if we do. The plain fact is, if you set the sound level at the location at 35 dBA, how far away it is really isn't.
What if you set the sound at 35 dBA at the protected location, and you set it at, we went ahead with the G standard too, so then it would be, if you apply the G standard at the protected location.
Yeah, well, if we apply it, it would be applied, yeah.
Well, right, I mean, if you wanted to absolutely insulate any protected location from a problem, if you apply the G standard at 65, which is the most conservative standard that Dr. Saul said.
Right, and again, that's.
And
there's a lot
I
of
know, but I'm
people
just saying,
questioning
right, I know, but I'm just saying, if you wanted to go the most conservative physics of it, the most quietest, and not use distance and try to justify distance at all, why it's not whatever, but you made it, you had to hit that G standard at the protected location, and you had to hit 35 decibels,
Mhm.
and it couldn't be more than 35 decibels.
My feeling personally was that that should come out, because I don't see where it's, it was just something, again, we were I'm not sure if you can actually justify it. You're not talking about any, the other setbacks that we've got having to do with safety, for instance, even on a participating parcel, we limited at least 1,500 feet. Well, that's pretty much based on ice flow and other actual physical dangers.
Well, let me pose this question then, if you took away, if you just based it on the 35, I mean, how close could the turbine end up being to someone's location, protected location? I mean, there's a...
Well, let's put it this way, depending on the terrain, I don't have a map right here in front of me, depending on the terrain, it depends on the sound power output of the turbines themselves. But the honest answer is, it can be anywhere from only 3,000 feet to, in a major project, if you had 15 turbines or more, because now you start adding the power levels from them, plus, you could end up being 4,000 to 5,000 feet. It really, you don't know what the actual point of the 35 dBA is until you do the predictive study. And it can vary depending on the terrain. That's why if you look at the maps that are done for the various places, especially in any terrain that has any hills or anything, if you look at a map on one of the flat ground areas, like out in the Midwest, there's these nice smooth curves around everything because the sound doesn't bounce, it doesn't get absorbed by hills and valleys, it doesn't reflect. You got these nice smooth curves at fairly easy, even distances. As soon as you get into anything hilly, it gets a lot, that's what the sound modeling software takes into account. It takes into account how much of that sound is being masked by physical objects, how much is going to be just deflected over the top, going away.
Well,
So
looking at the
you
numbers,
can't say an exact distance for that 35.
okay, but look,
Let's say at least it'd be a minimum distance, so.
right, well, I think, Dave, I think if you look up at B, that's what I was trying to calculate while you were looking through, looking at all the different standards. So what will be the actual minimum distance would be, if it's 200 feet, 200% of the height of the wind turbine from the property line of any non-participating parcel. So theoretically, if you had a non-participating parcel with a structure just over the property line, and the wind turbines were like, say, at the top of like 450 feet, say, okay? So the 200% would be 900 feet. So in theory, to go with your question, looking at this, if you didn't have the 4,000 feet in there, it could theoretically be roughly, just over 900 feet away if the 35 decibel standard was hit. That would be the absolute.
Sure, it's not based on a sound issue though, but 4,000 feet is a lot more palatable to people than 900 feet.
Right, and that's what Bruce, that's what we're talking about. But you asked the question, what would be the minimum that it could be? And I was just trying to work through the mathematics in that, to figure out if we didn't have 4,000 feet, what that would mean. That's just mathematically. I'm not saying we should do it. I'm just saying you asked the question, that's the math.
If you want to tie it in with the participating one, you can make it 1,500 feet, so that's, if that's a safety issue, and just roll them in together.
Well, then the only thing that you start to get into with that 900 and 1,500 feet or whatever, I mean, if you wanted to go with those minimums is, all the literature starts to talk about, you don't really hear a lot of complaints in the literature at less than 1,500, or at more than 1,500 feet. The complaints, it's almost like there's a good amount, and then at 1,500 feet, they start to drop off fairly quickly. However, if you do anything, like if we only went 200%, for example, and they made it really close, that would be like 1,000 feet. The complaints are still pretty prevalent at 1,000 feet. So I would say that I would not be relying just on that math for that. I don't think that's a good idea. So Bruce, what we're saying is that the minimum would be, because if you said they're like 450 feet, like kind of just a rough number here on the deputy top,
Yeah, except it's never gonna
Well,
happen.
I know, but I'm just talking a theoretical number here, because that's what we're talking theoretically now. So theoretically, though, most of the complaints that you hear around the world, I think everybody kind of agrees that inside 1,500 feet is where a vast majority of the complaints have come from over time. Is that accurate?
That's accurate, the majority. Now.
Hang on, just
Yeah,
let's
okay.
walk through it a little slowly here, okay, so I can chew on it too. So if you only use the sound and the 35 decibels as a standard, and you put it at that, then you would be, if on some academic project, somebody came in and said, oh yeah, well, I can get you down to 35 decibels, I can get you down to 30 decibels at 1,000 feet for whoever knows magic, okay? I've got you down there. But then we still know from history that there's a problem inside 1,500 feet. I mean, is that an acceptable risk? Just
Okay.
academically.
Yeah, okay, here's where I'm looking at here. First of all, the 1,500 feet under F, the major reason for that is safety. At that distance, I can't find any literature saying that they've got any ice flow or anything beyond that. If there was, I'd be recommending that to go up. There's a whole study on ice flow. Most of, how far it can go, and if it leaves the blade at exactly 45 degrees at full speed, and
180 miles an hour or whatever.
yeah, well, it'll go so far, and that's the main reason for that one, is literally, that's a physical danger zone under certain weather conditions. The thing about the distance versus the sound is that the distance isn't really what is important as far as protecting someone, it's the sound that's important. Now, right now, the average of these big wind turbines are producing around 103 decibels dBA of sound power at the turbine. But they're quieting them down. Some of the new designs are chopping 3-6 decibels off of that. And you can't tell what's going to happen in the future. Some of the things, okay, so if you just say a fixed distance rather than ignoring the decibel level, well, if 10 years from now they say, we've got a new blade design, which they're working on, that will reduce the sound by 10 decibels. Well, you don't need the same sort of separation in order to protect people from sound any longer.
Well, now you can have it within 1,500 feet of a non-participating parcel.
Right, you could have it closer. The only thing you can have it closer before you're into that area where people are either annoyed or actually have any danger.
The fact that you're picking a sound level 35 decibels, couldn't that be challenged by, people bring in their own experts and say, in other words, 4,000 feet is 4,000 feet. It's a finite, measurable, all that. 35 decibels, you could have a diverse opinions as to whether.
Well, if they have a diverse opinion, they're going to have, they're either going to have to, if they make complaints, the standard thing is when you do the compliance sound study, is you do one near their location as well. In fact, that's added into the appendix on some of the revisions, is that if somebody makes complaints that they think that the sound is a